Let me ask you something. When was the last time you looked up at the sky and felt worried? Not about rain, not about turbulence, but about fighter jets. Because right now, over Europe, the sky is not calm. And the most dangerous part? There's no official war. 3 Russian fighter jets enter Estonian airspace. No permission, no radio call. Transponders off, 12 minutes. That's all it took. 12 minutes inside NATO territory. And suddenly, the Cold War doesn't feel so historical anymore. Now let's slow this down. This isn't one isolated mistake. Not a lost pilot, not a navigation error, not, oops, wrong turn. This is a pattern. In 2025 alone, Norway scrambled its F-35 fighter jets 41 times. 41. That's nearly once a week, in peacetime. Let that sink in. F-35 pilots running at combat tempo during what is officially labeled peace. And if you think that's routine, it's not. On January 6, 2026, 2 Norwegian F-35s launched to intercept a Russian maritime patrol aircraft. Technically, it hadn't crossed NATO airspace, but it didn't need to. It was flying just close enough to map radar coverage, close enough to measure response time, close enough to ask the question, how fast can NATO react? This is not random flying. This is stress testing. Imagine someone walking up to your front door every week, turning the handle, not entering, just checking if it's locked. At some point, it's not a curiosity, it's rehearsal. September 19, 2025, 3 Russian MiG-31s cross into Estonian territory, 10 kilometers deep, no transponders, no communication, no flight plan. That's not an accident, that's a statement. They fly parallel to the border, near Tallinn, Estonia's capital. Italian F-35s scramble, Finnish jets track, Swedish Gripens monitor exit. Within minutes, you have half of Northern Europe watching the same radar screen. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. The MiG-31 isn't just fast, it's Mach 2.8 fast. And one version of it can carry hypersonic missiles. Hypersonic means this: if launched, European cities would have minutes, maybe less, to react. So when armed interceptors enter NATO airspace with transponders off, that's not symbolic, that's pressure. Here's what makes this more serious. It wasn't just September 19th. There were multiple violations throughout 2025. A Russian fighter escorting a Shadow Fleet tanker into Estonian airspace. A military transport aircraft crossing without clearance. A helicopter intrusion. Even a maritime border violation at sea. Air, sea, drones, fighters, every direction. That's not random behavior. That's multi-dimensional probing. If this were a chessboard, Russia isn't attacking the king. It's tapping every piece just to see which one moves slowest. Then the drones. 19 Russian drones swarmed Polish airspace over 7 hours. 7 hours. Polish F-16 scramble. Dutch F-35 scramble. German Patriot missile systems activate. One drone reportedly carried an explosive warhead. Airports suspended flights. Think about that. Commercial passengers waiting at the gate because someone's drone decided to test a border. This is where it gets real. Because when military aircraft fly without transponders in shared civilian airspace, air traffic control can't see them properly. You've got Ryanair flights, Lufthansa flights, families on holiday, and somewhere in that same sky, a Mach 2 interceptor with no signal. The only thing preventing disaster? Speed. Speed of NATO response. This is not theoretical, it's razor-thin timing. Then Christmas Day 2025, Russian strategic bombers fly near Norway. Christmas, that's not random scheduling, that's messaging. Even on your holiday, we are here. These bombers can carry long-range cruise missiles capable of reaching Western Europe. And they're escorted by fighters. So now, it's not just the Baltic, it's the Arctic. And at the same time, Russian bombers enter Alaska's air defense zone. Same week, 2 continents, 2 pressure points. That's not a coincidence. That's choreography. Here's the real issue. Russia isn't invading. Not yet. It's doing something arguably more dangerous. It's normalizing tension. Every time a violation happens and no missile is fired, the threshold shifts. It becomes another incident. And another, until suddenly, scrambling jets weekly feels routine, but it shouldn't. 41 scrambles in 1 year is not routine. 3 scrambles in 1 week is not routine. Armed interceptors with transponders off is not routine. This is escalation below the war line. Strategic gray zone pressure. Now here's where things get complicated. Some leaders say, if a jet crosses into NATO airspace, shoot it down. Simple, clear, deterrence through strength. Others hesitate, because the next step after shooting down a Russian aircraft isn't a press conference, it's retaliation, and that's the tightrope. How do you show strength without triggering Article 5? How do you defend airspace without lighting the fuse? And this is where the alliance itself is being tested, not just militarily, politically, because unity matters more than jets. If NATO fractures internally, that's the real victory for Moscow. Let's strip away the headlines. Russia is mapping response times, measuring radar coverage, tracking scramble speed, identifying hesitation. It's not about one airspace violation, it's about understanding the alliance's nerve. How long before someone overreacts? How long before someone underreacts? Where is the fracture line? Because history has shown something uncomfortable. 2008, Georgia. 2014, Crimea. 2022, Ukraine. Each time, gradual moves preceded major ones. Each time, hesitation was studied. That's what worries Eastern European governments. Not today's flight, but tomorrow's calculation. NATO increases deployments. More F-35s. Expanded radar. AI-assisted drone detection. Turkey is accelerating F-16 deployments. UK, Germany, France reinforcing patrols. This is not symbolic buildup. It's operational. Pilots are flying more. Maintenance crews working more. Airbase is busier. Peacetime feels louder. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Nobody wants war. Not Moscow, not Brussels, not Washington. But everyone wants leverage. And leverage is built through pressure. So Russia applies air pressure. NATO responds with air presence, back and forth, like two boxers circling the ring, testing distance. The problem? In boxing, there's a referee. Up there in the sky, there isn't. And the sky is crowded. Commercial flights, military patrols, drones, bombers, one miscalculation, one pilot misread the radar, one delayed scramble. That's all it takes. The danger isn't necessarily an invasion tomorrow, it's the normalization of brinkmanship. When fighter jets running at combat tempo become background noise, that's when strategic risk increases. Because fatigue sets in. Because routine dulls urgency. Because one day, someone assumes it's just another probe, and maybe it's not. The next few months matter because pressure campaigns either escalate or they stall. Right now, the sky over Europe is not calm. It's measured, it's tense, it's calculated, and it's getting busier. And when the skies get crowded with ego and hardware, history tells us, accidents are rarely accidental. Continuing on, what's happening in the skies over Europe is not just about jets, it's about patience. It's about nerves, and it's about who blinks first. You see, Russia isn't trying to start World War III tomorrow morning. If that were the goal, the strategy would look very different. This is slower, colder, calculated. It's about stretching NATO, pulling at it from the edges, like testing the seams of a jacket, looking for loose stitching. And here's the uncomfortable question. What happens if one of those seams actually tears? Inside NATO, there's tension. Some leaders say, enough is enough. If a fighter jet crosses into our airspace, shoot it down. Clear boundary, simple rule. But others ask the harder question, and then what? Because once you shoot down a Russian military aircraft, you don't get to rewind the tape. Russia responds. Maybe proportionally, maybe symbolically, maybe unpredictably. And then the world shifts. That's why every scramble right now feels like walking on glass, firm but fragile. Now here's something many people are missing. This isn't just a Baltic issue, or a Norwegian issue, or a Polish issue. This is global signaling. Because while NATO jets are scrambling over Estonia, China is watching carefully. If Russia can test NATO airspace weekly without major consequence, what lesson does that send to Beijing? In geopolitics, actions speak louder than speeches at the UN. China studies response times, political unity, public reactions, media cycles. If the West normalizes constant gray zone pressure, that template travels. And suddenly, what's happening over the Baltic could echo over Taiwan, or the South China Sea. That's why Washington isn't treating this lightly. This isn't regional turbulence, it's a demonstration of alliance endurance. Let's talk about the United States, because behind every NATO scramble, there's American capability backing it. logistics, surveillance, air refueling, command infrastructure. But the US is balancing something complicated. It's supporting Ukraine, managing tensions in the Pacific, dealing with domestic politics, and now sustaining elevated air patrol tempo in Europe. That's resource strain, not collapse, but strain. And Russia knows that stretching multiple fronts forces difficult prioritization. If Europe feels insecure, it demands more presence. If the Pacific feels unstable, it demands more ships. Strategy isn't always about firing first. Sometimes it's about forcing the opponent to stay permanently alert. And alertness costs money, alertness costs manpower, alertness costs political capital. Here's something nobody likes to admit. Fatigue is dangerous. Not dramatic fatigue, quiet fatigue. When scrambling jets weekly becomes routine. When airspace violations become Tuesday headlines, attention dulls. And dull attention in military environments? That's when mistakes happen. And mistakes at Mach 2 don't give second chances. So what is Moscow really doing? It's probing thresholds. How deep can a MiG fly before the response escalates? How long can drones hover before they're shot down? How many incidents can occur before NATO unity cracks? Because unity is NATO's real weapon, not the F-35, not the Patriot battery. Unity. If one member hesitates, if another overreacts, if internal political divisions grow, that's the fracture point. Russia doesn't need to defeat NATO militarily. It needs to be divided psychologically, and that's much cheaper. Now flip the scenario. Imagine a NATO pilot seconds from intercept, radar confusion, poor weather, miscommunication, and suddenly a missile is fired. Maybe defensive, maybe justified, but from Moscow's perspective, an attack. And that's where escalation becomes automatic. Nobody has full control once momentum builds. History shows this. Crises escalate not because leaders wake up wanting war, but because events move faster than diplomacy. Let's bring this back to people. Because strategy is abstract until civilians are involved. Every time military aircraft operate without transponders in shared airspace, commercial aviation safety narrows. Air traffic controllers rely on signals. When those signals vanish, they depend on interception speed. And in a crowded sky, reaction windows shrink. It only takes one tragic collision to transform political tension into public outrage. And public outrage changes policy fast. That's the wild card. Meanwhile, energy markets watch closely. European security influences gas prices. Military tension influences insurance costs. Insurance costs influence shipping routes. This is interconnected. When bombers fly near Norway, investors notice. When drones swarm Poland, airlines reroute. Geopolitics doesn't stay on radar screens. It flows into economies. That's the big question. Can Russia sustain high-tempo probing without crossing a red line? Can NATO sustain constant readiness without political exhaustion? Both sides are walking a line, and neither side wants to be the one that stumbles. But the margin for error is shrinking. Let's be honest, this is psychological warfare, not bombs, not invasions, nerves, confidence, projection of strength. Russia wants to show we can operate freely. NATO wants to show we can respond instantly. The skies become theater, and every scramble is a message, but messages sometimes get misread. The next few months will reveal something critical. Either the frequency decreases, signaling stabilization, or it increases, signaling escalation. If violations intensify, political pressure will mount for decisive action, and decisive action carries consequences. This is why diplomats are busy behind closed doors, because while jets fly loudly, negotiations move quietly, and sometimes quiet conversations prevent loud disasters. Here's something we must admit. Both sides are rational actors. They understand the consequences. They understand nuclear deterrence. That's why this remains below open war. But rational actors can still miscalculate. Confidence can turn into overconfidence. Testing can turn into provocation. And provocation can turn into a crisis. That's how history often unfolds, not with a dramatic announcement, but with incremental steps that suddenly becomes irreversible. We are in a gray zone. Not peace, not war, strategic tension, military chess at high altitude. The skies over Europe are crowded with capability, crowded with ego, crowded with history, and crowded skies demand discipline, because one reckless move changes everything. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe this is calculated pressure that will eventually cool down, or are we watching the early stages of something much larger? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you found this breakdown helpful, support the work. like the video, subscribe to the channel, stay informed, because the world is shifting, and staying aware is no longer optional. We'll continue to monitor this closely. Stay safe and stay sharp.